Okay, well, welcome. This is our latest edition of interviewing key figures from around the world as part of VINEX's trying to basically get an assessment of how different producers and buyers in different countries are coping with COVID and the impact on their businesses. So very, very welcome. Very pleased to welcome Bruce Jack from South Africa. So hi Bruce, how you doing?
Hey, Chief. I'm very well. Thank you very much. Wonderful opportunity and looking forward to having a chat.
Yeah, no, it's been a while. It's been good to, well, it's good to see you actually, because obviously we chat quite a lot offline, but we can obviously get into the situation in South Africa, which I guess for most people around the world, arguably is the most stringent lockdown we've seen. But before we get into that, can you perhaps talk us through, give people an idea of your background and how you've got to be running Bruce Jack Wines and making your own wines?
Sure. Thanks, Richard. So started, I guess, fell in love with the wine industry from a retail perspective. I worked in a bottle store from the age of 16 and I landed up doing a political science degree in a very different South Africa. In terms of the fact that it was still apartheid, I did a politics and English degree and got sort of a little bit embroiled in student politics at the time, which is a fascinating sort of lens to see some of the Marxist ideologies that are coming out of the government at the moment. And then landed up doing a master's degree in English literature at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. And realized at the end of that in fact I'd always worked in the wine industry, and realized after that I was still madly and passionately in love with everything wine. And anyway, writing the great South African novel seemed a fairly naive and stupid thing to do when you were 22 or 23. So I thought I'd shelve that idea and get stuck into my passion. I ended up then doing a winemaking degree at the famous Roseworthy College in Australia, in South Australia. It was tied to the University of Adelaide, and that was an enology and viticulture degree. So eventually, after many, many wonderful years as a student, landed up having to pay the bills. Started a winery called Flagstone Winery in South Africa, which I think many people will be, particularly in the UK, it's a very big on-trade brand. Obviously suffered like many other on-trade brands recently with the COVID lockdown, and sold that 10 years after starting it in 2008 to Constellation Brands, which was then the world's biggest wine company. And that was a wonderful education in the big side of business. I'd been focused on the kind of slightly egocentric, myopic, I want to make the best wine in the world, young idealist, and really wasn't at all interested in how the big cogs of wine business operated, and was suddenly thrown into mergers and acquisitions without a clue. So yeah, really learned a lot and really became fascinated by that aspect. How do you make money in this bizarre industry of ours? And how did the big guys do it? Ended up working for Constellation and then what became Accolade when Constellation sold much of itself and made the Kamala brand in South Africa as head winemaker for Accolade South Africa. And then landed up actually being group winemaker for Accolade Wines, spending quite a lot of time in Australia and Chile. And just nice to be back actually. It was sort of a roundabout route from my Aussie wine training, spending a lot of time in Berry in the Riverland, trying to craft this juggernaut called Hardy's with this incredible momentum of its own from a business perspective, but sometimes losing its way from a stylistic and philosophical perspective, and trying to keep wine values in a big brand that at some stage can feel like a commodity. And keeping it true to the wine industry, keep elements of truth important to wine and important to winemakers in the big brand like that. That was hugely challenging, and again, I learned a lot. Left them in 2018, beginning of 2018 and started my own business again called Bruce Jack Wines. And voila, owe my life to the bank again, and stressed out as hell, as is, but you know, with all sorts of wonderful experiences behind me, and a huge network now of amazing winemakers who I've worked with around the world, and being part of that winemaking tribe, of course, fills you with joy every day.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting now, I think, with your Bruce Jack Wines project, your business, is that you've obviously taken a lot of what you just talked about there with Accolade and that global sourcing knowledge and the ability to be able to blend, you know, large volumes of wine, but also, as you say, authentic, true to its place type wines. I mean, perhaps talk through how you go about what the Bruce Jack Wine project is, and how you source the wines for it.
Okay, so the Bruce Jack Wine project, I think, is unique in the world of wine currently, although I think a lot of big brands that we see around today may well have started this way. So it's a winemaker-owned brand to begin with, so that's very important. It's not owned in any sort of way by a corporate that requires quarterly reporting or any of those strange things that are often imposed on the wine industry and never really have a nice fit. So it's family owned. The other thing that makes it different is that we operate out of different origins, not just my home country of South Africa, but because I'm Australian trained, my wines are really quite Australian in style, in terms of the sort of obsession with truth to the grape, and trying to keep some of the other slightly dirty and unwanted characters out of a wine. And we make wine elsewhere. So the origins, although the winemaking style is Australian and I'm South African, we make wine in Chile, where I have a lot of experience. I've been making wine in Spain for over 17 years with my brand La Báscula. So Spain is the other origin. So the three origins currently are that where we're producing wine is South Africa, Chile, and Spain. And I think that combination of it being a winemaker-owned brand, family-owned brand, multi-origin, and then on a massive scale with these hugely ambitious goals in terms of being able to produce something with real longevity and in sufficient quantities to allow you to be global. Now, global for me means that you need to be available in different countries. And that's what's very exciting. How does one tie in the logistics and the financing of that kind of ambition with keeping true to a style and to a philosophy of winemaking? You know, really being true to those elements of winemaking and wine crafting, which are shared with, you know, top Pinots and Burgundy. And I think that's about authenticity. It's about being true to how you grow your grapes, uplifting the people with whom you work in the vineyards, wherever that is, and giving back as much as possible. So keeping the how we do it and how we can compete. You asked the real reason, despite all the little winemaking things, but from a financial perspective, the way we can compete is because we don't really pay ourselves very much, and winemakers are not used to. I mean, I'm not used to a huge salary. I did very well at Accolade, and half the time I looked at my paycheck and was a little embarrassed because I was enjoying what I was doing so much. And really, a lot of winemaking is driven by passion. And then to be paid this big whacking check every month is a little bit overawing. So I think we're able to focus, therefore, a lot of our cost structure is very different. We don't have to pay these big corporate, salaries and these big marketing budgets. For us, it's about getting the best grapes, paying for those, paying for the best winemakers, paying for the best barrels, paying for the best production equipment to be able to keep everything as sort of true and crafted as possible, no matter how big you get. And
from what I understand, the sourcing elements, so the producers that you're working with are kind of almost like on a joint venture basis. So rather than you're just necessarily just purchasing their grapes and making wine from their grapes, they're also very much part of sort of the Bruce Jack. So if you succeed, they succeed. Is that right? From my memory?
Yeah, completely. And I think this is again unique. I've seen this in other industries. So You see it in the fashion industry with collaborations. They're called collabs, right? With, you know, basketball players and sneaker brands. You see it in car manufacturing, where technology is shared. I mean, the BRZ that was produced as a collab between Subaru and Toyota is a classic example. So you see this happening in other industries, but you don't really see the same philosophy in the wine industry. And for me, it's always seemed crazy. If ever there's an industry that is ripe and that is perfectly suited from a structural perspective towards collaboration, it's the wine industry. So my kind of idea was to work as closely as possible with people who could provide me with a crucial element to any kind of global brand ambition, and that is what I call confidence of supply. So you don't just need confidence in the fact that you're going to get supply. You also need confidence in the quality and the consistency of that supply. Yeah. Because if you don't have that confidence, then there's no ways that you can put your heart on the bottle of wine, your name on a bottle of wine, and know that every year you're going to be able to, you know, do as well as you can out there in the marketplace. Hopefully beat the competition from a value perspective, but if not everybody, at least be up there in the top 10 percentile. And the only way to do that is to collaborate with the people who grow the grapes. So wherever we operate, we do joint ventures. So in South Africa, it's a joint venture, and it's a classic South African joint venture. This is very alien in the US. When I talk about the way we've traditionally done joint ventures in South Africa, everyone sort of looks at me a little bit strangely, because it's a 50-50 joint venture. So there's not this 51-49 rubbish. For me, collaboration is a philosophy. It's not a way to get one over the competition or make more money than anyone else. It's about always making sure that you share the upside. And the only way to really do that truthfully and authentically is with a 50-50 joint venture. Yep. All decisions are made unanimously. It's a very small board in each of my businesses of 4 people, 2 directors from each side. Yep. And you can't do anything unless it's unanimous. And that to me is the true essence of collaboration. You need to have all the different elements. Teams are always more powerful than individuals. Individuals can be inspiring and have all sorts of little quirks that make the team really hum. But you need teams to be able to do things as ambitious and exciting and as creative as this. So in South Africa, it's an organization called Uniwines. They're the second biggest primary producer grower of grapes and maker of wine. In South Africa, they're also the top 1 or 2 fair trade producer in the world, which is very important for our philosophy in terms of upliftment and giving back as much as possible. And in Chile, we work with St. Nicholas, my very good friend, Eduardo Bencherut, and he shares my passion for a whole lot of the quirkiness about wine, which makes it exciting and fun. And then in Spain, I work with Victor Manzanos from Manzanos and La Rioja. Yeah. And we also, obviously buy wine in from elsewhere. It's not just Rioja. So there's always a very strong and shared upside with each of our primary producers.
And as part of that, because of the, with your knowledge of with Accolade as well, in terms of obviously harvests every year change and vintages, climate change, and some countries have better harvests than others. Is that part of it for you to be able to switch supply and have that, well, as you say, confidence of supply for yourself as well? If you're going to create a brand, you need to have the wines every year to fulfill that demand, don't you?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Within countries, we have a buffer against differences in climate from vintage to vintage by drawing on grapes and buying wine in different areas, right? So that gives us that kind of control over climate change and also the difference in weather patterns. And it's a Conchatora model. Conchatora is a company I have a lot of time and respect for in terms of the way that they have gone back to the very things that make winemaking so different from anything else. One of the reasons why Conchatora wines just so often over with authentic wines at any price point. And it's because they've got their foot in the soil in terms of their own vineyards. They also buy in grapes. It's about a 33% percent, third percent thing, and then they buy in wine, another third. So they're able to sort of ameliorate the risk associated with that. But in terms of the different origins, that's a little bit me being egotistical and a little eccentric, I suppose, because these are countries that I've made wine in. I've fallen in love with the cultures. I've fallen in love with the cuisine. I've fallen in love with the people, and it's really just to have fun. I mean, we've got to have fun in this life. Particularly in the wine industry, it's a lot about having fun and being creative and getting reward from that. And so for me, the thing with countries like that, they have to be countries that I understand. There have to be wine industries and structures within the wine industry that I understand. So these are countries that I've worked in, for over a decade, and so I really do understand them, and I believe that I can, and therefore, with my sort of insight into how you put the puzzle together of big brands, never override the cultural and the philosophical, foundation that is creating those wines. And that's very important for me.
Can I ask you?
Sorry, one more thing, Richard. The other reason, which is sort of as a byproduct of this sort of self-interest, is because certain countries do better in certain markets. So a classic example is Norway, where although it's in Scandinavia, which is very strong for South Africa, we don't sell any South African wine, or very little. But Spain is very strong. So we can sell, we can sort of target the brand. It's a way of getting a global reach very quickly, because you're targeting origins of wine into certain markets, doing it in an authentic way that makes sense not only to the buyer, but also to the end consumer, that can relate directly to the philosophy of the brand and what we stand for. But, it's a classic example, would be, well, you're in Russia, where Chile does very well, South Africa not so well, so let's pick up a bottle of Bruce Jack Chile.
So bringing it up to speed now, I mean, has that approach in some way being able to buffer you a little bit from what's happened with COVID, in terms of having different sorts of supply from different parts of the world? Or, I mean, I know every country is going through this in their own way. South Africa arguably more than anywhere else. But what impact has COVID had on the Bruce Jack wine project then?
So I would say, in terms of volume, we're still about 90% South Africa focused. So it's had a huge impact, a hugely negative impact.
Yeah.
And the lockdown in South Africa, while we've seen lockdowns elsewhere, has been like Alice in Wonderland kind of lockdown. There are elements to it which are quite odd and confusing to people on a lot of different levels. So it has affected us badly. What it has done, of course, is given us time to focus on the logistics and structure of our businesses outside of South Africa. So that's been very positive, and we've been able to tweak and not rush the Chilean production this year, which has given us some incredible wines. And then Spain has obviously gone through similar upheaval and really been hit hard by COVID. Our hearts go out to them. That in itself has slowed everything down from a Spanish perspective. But we're slowly starting to see, that change as lockdown in Europe is lifted, which of course is the main market for us from a Spanish perspective. In the South African lockdown and how that's affected us has been really devastating on three levels. I think the first level is emotionally, it's felt like an assault course. Yeah. The decisions that have been taken by the Command Council in South Africa have, while we can understand, most of us, the rationale behind trying to keep the virus at bay while we created this extra hospital and medical buffer, some of the decisions taken, because we're such a diverse and such an unequal society, haven't really suited anyone. Things like not being allowed to walk your dog for example, has got people wondering right from the very beginning. And then to be the only wine producing country not being able to export, which of course is crazy, because it's one of the most important producers of GDP in South Africa. It employs directly 180,000 people. It's the biggest employer within the Western Cape, and indirectly probably 1 million jobs come off the wine industry. And to have that absolutely shut down from an export perspective was terrible. I mean, people lost their jobs overnight. And unfortunately, a lot of people on farms in South Africa are what we call stukwerk, which means they're piecemeal workers. They work from day to day or week to week. And to have, you've maybe got a week or two savings, to have that then, be stretched out to 8 weeks. These people are living off soup kitchens. There is no money, and a lot of them fall outside of the remit of social grants. Of course, our social grants are just hanging on by their fingernails, because we are a suffering economy anyway, an economy that was on its knees prior to COVID. And then to not allow us to make money from overseas exports in an industry that wouldn't challenge the integrity of the lockdown from a health perspective boggles the mind. And I think in a lot of ways, the decisions that have been taken subsequent to that, in terms of not allowing alcohol to be sold in any form in South Africa, while you can understand again the initial rationale, and not allowing cigarettes now as well, it just seems that there is an element of Marxist philosophy that's coming out of the Command Council. I mean, a lot of these guys now in control in South Africa were trained in a Marxist philosophical sort of bent, a lot of them in the former Soviet Union. And that kind of control over any market dynamics or destruction of the free market economy, even at the expense of people's livelihoods, lives, and health, is just extraordinary. It's mind-boggling. It doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of there's that emotional thing that one's gone through has been really devastating. I've seen a lot of my fellow producers, fellow wine brand owners, and farmers on their knees, absolutely destroyed. And I think there's going to be somewhere in the region of about 100 wine farms that are not going to be able to recover financially from this.
Right.
Which look, we're in a very lucky position with, I already had my Spanish business. I have a cider business. I have an interest in a cider business in Ireland as well as South Africa. So, these things have allowed us to keep the cash flowing in. But for people who are solely focused on wine, and that's their life, and to first of all not be allowed to export, and then mostly sell their wine locally anyway, to have that taken away from them has been devastating. And I don't think there's going to be some people will recover, but I think I would say a third of our wine industry is going to be destroyed.
And is there any indication from the government yet, or from the trade, about how long the lockdown? I mean, obviously it's a very difficult question to answer, but are there any more restrictions or any more sort of relaxations of restrictions likely to happen in the near future?
I'm involved in a group of fairly high up sort of thinkers in the wine industry. So involves the CEOs of all the big businesses and a consortium of independent retailers. And wholesalers within the South African context, and that is one. And we have weekly meetings to try and plot a way of survival through. So my local company, which is the company that owns the farm, we sell most of our estate wine, which is called the Drift Estate, into South Africa. And of course, we've just had vintage, so we're having to pay for any barrels that we bought, any chemicals that we bought, blah 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 blah, and of course not having any income flowing in. And we've really struggled to get any kind of support from government. We have had a little bit recently from the unemployment insurance fund, which has been great, which has allowed us to pay some of the salaries of our staff. The bigger guys who sell a lot locally, including big companies like Distel, who are really our most powerful and and sort of most structured
Yeah.
business, along with companies that are almost as big, just as dynamic, like DGB and these guys have been similarly, the legs cut out from under them. And some of the rhetoric that's coming out of government, which is like, okay, well, when we do allow you to buy booze, it'll be like for 3 hours a day. Right. Goes against everything that makes sense from a medical perspective to stop the spread of the virus. So, to answer your question, the pre-COVID world and the post-COVID world in South Africa will be hugely different, with a lot of people going bankrupt. But more than that, we are seeing a sort of a rhetoric that's coming out of government, which is blaming alcohol for all our ills, as opposed to looking at some of the other things like a weakened police force and corruption and all the other things. So the thing that's really happening, of course, is that a lot of people have got into the illegal booze trade. Yeah. There's a huge amount of home brews being made, and of course that's not only can be very unhealthy for people, but it also creates a sort of social neural pathway between the gangsters and the politicians, because of course that has to work hand in hand, like it did in Prohibition. Who are the people in American Prohibition who got the most out of it? It was the crooked politicians and the gangsters. Yeah. And I mean, it's not going to be any different here. So, that long-term ill effect is going to hurt us for many years to come.
So, which, in a way, that perhaps puts the onus really much more on the industry itself. I mean, not only in South Africa, but internationally. I mean, do you have a message for, what kind of response have you seen from the international buying community towards South Africa? And I know there's a lot of strong feelings in the UK about supporting South Africa and buying South Africa, but I guess, as you say, this is something which is not just a 2-3 month situation. It's something that's going to be going on for a number of years.
It's a great question. I've been, I almost want to cry now, and I hope I don't. I've been amazed by the support that we've had from buyers. I mean, I've spent my 20 years fighting with buyers in the nicest possible way, and to sense the camaraderie and the support that we've had has been very emotional. You really do feel part of a tribe, which I think the wine industry is, and it has been so evident, particularly from the UK and Canada, to be fair. But those are our strongest markets from an export perspective. The support has been amazing. So I would like to publicly thank those buyers out there and in the trade, the support that we've had. And I think it's not just me. I mean, I've heard this from other, South African wine producers. The support has been phenomenal. It's been humbling.
Yeah, and I know this weekend actually, I think Wines of South Africa, aren't they, launching a kind of a global spectacular South African drink, to get the trade, and I've already seen on social media, I think Nick Darlington, the wine merchant of the UK, has launched a great British Bry off at the weekend, and I think certainly everyone who's been to South Africa, I think what's the phrase about South Africa gets under your fingernails?
Yeah, it does. It creeps into your soul. Yeah, it really does. Yeah. Well, of course, it's where we all come from. Richard, I mean, we all are African, and I think part of this pandemic and the way that we have, in many cases, lost civil liberties and sort of agreed to give up our civil liberties for the betterment and for the safety of all of us, has brought us close together. We've seen it. There's the wonderful tradition that was started in the UK with, applauding the frontline healthcare workers every evening, has spread to South Africa. We do it here. We do it on the farm at 8 o'clock. No one can hear us, but I think it's for me that's what's been so uplifting, and it's reflected in the response that we've seen from the wine industry. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. Actually, well, I'm a big Liverpool fan, and was it Jurgen Klopp has ever found some great words where he said something recently when he was talking to a fan about, we've never been further apart, but we've never been closer together, which, I think just sort of sums up, you're in South Africa, but I kind of feel like we're in the same room, it's, we're everybody wants to help each other out and do what we can to support, not just now, but as you say, I mean, looking further afield if we can. I mean, you mentioned obviously a long-term impact in South Africa. I mean, but do you think globally, internationally, how the wine trade works and how we've behaved in the past? We all go to Provine, we all go to VinExpo, or all these big trade fairs around the world. I mean, do you see a change in the way that the wine trade actually buys and sells wine down the line, or if the industry's not that broke, why fix it, kind of thing?
So I was reading an interesting article, not on our industry, but on the tourism industry. And in a similar way, the travel and tourism industry, which Richard, you know really well, the guys are claiming that they won't need to do fairs anymore going forward. There's been, of course, been completely closed down, even worse than the wine industry. No one's traveling, but there's this online travel thing that's come up, the online wilderness safaris that we're seeing, the way that technology is being used to communicate not only the essence of a wine farm or a game farm or a beach resort or whatever, but also the interpersonal opportunity to discuss ideas and your offering over this sort of media or medium is going to be a complete game changer. So they've already kind of accepted that. The wine industry, I don't know. We got to experience the product physically. This is what makes our product different. And the nuances and the ancient history that is involved in this drug that we peddle, and the culture that has been spun around it and so infused and so uplifted and so enriched our creations is not something that kind of one can do so successfully over like a Zoom tasting. I've been doing Zoom tastings every couple of days with all our agents around the world, and it's quite fun to be able to taste a wine and see the reaction of them tasting the same wine, whether it's in Thailand or Canada or wherever. But I think to be in the same room as somebody and to be feeling the same atmospheric pressure as everybody, and to be to watch the body language in minute, immediate detail as the aroma hits their frontal cortex, and suddenly the neurons fire and the sparks happen and the eyes light up and the pupils dilate and all that kind of stuff, that physicality and closeness of the wine industry, that almost animalistic interaction when you enjoy a great meal over it with a great glass of wine with a great mate, and the smells of the restaurants and everything. I think that's really difficult to replicate, and I miss that so much. I'm sure so many of us do, that interaction that we have in this wine tribe. So to be able to get back to that, I think we're all gagging for that opportunity. And I'm not sure that's going to be that easy to replace.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, share your experiences there. I mean, on the one hand, it's been an amazing opportunity to some extent. We're having this conversation here by Zoom, which perhaps we wouldn't have done 2 months ago. And similarly, taking part in debates with people from all over the world. So on the one hand, I think, it is linking people together, and it is making people so much more aware of each other's issues. Do you though, in terms of like how, I mean, obviously you got an international business. I mean, do you think once things settle back to normal and we go into another harvest and the seasons come again, that I mean, do you look at the wine future as optimistic or pessimistic? I mean, how do you see things shaping up over the next sort of few years?
I take a lot of solace in the fact that our particular form of drug has been around for forever and seen through probably as bad, if not worse, upheavals in society and civilizations. Just think back to Sumeria or Egypt or Greece or Rome or everywhere that wine has traveled the journey of mankind. There have been upheavals and destructions and wipeouts and all sorts of exaltations as well. And it has been a constant, I think it's what makes our product so different again, is that richness of culture that is imbued in every aroma and every story and every grain of soil that we utilize, harvest, in this amazing production. And I think I think the world of wine going forward from that perspective, I'm not so sure it's going to be affected overarchingly. It'll be there. I mean, this is the thing about the wine industry. It's not a flash in the pan thing. You're not going to make a lot of money unless you cheat people. If you want to do this properly, and if you want to be true to the product and true to the culture and history of that product, this is not about making a quick buck. This is about being part of that ageless tapestry of the human story. And to revel in that and find passion in that and find meaning in that, I think is what makes us different from other guys. So I'm very confident that we will continue through this. And I think the question is, how are we going to come out of this from a business perspective? I'm not worried about the craft. I'm not worried about the passion. I'm not worried about the creativity. I'm not worried about the culture of this tribe, of this product. I'm worried about whether or not we're going to take this opportunity to realize what a lot of businesses are realizing, that we need to get away from greed, that we need to share more, we need to collaborate more. This is an opportunity for humanity to reassess what we've been doing, how neoliberalism is kind of screwed with our minds, and we celebrate people who have more money than they know what to do with, and we can't somehow work out that poisoning the oceans and having people starve while hundreds of millions of tons of fast food are thrown away every day around the world makes sense. It doesn't make sense. This has to have led us to some sort of crisis. Now, whether it's coincided with the virus or not is irrelevant. The point is that we have the opportunity to reflect. And so I think, within the wine business, we are much better off than most, because very few of us are driven by that greed. But I think some of our suppliers are, and some of those who are not passionate about the art and the creation and the culture of wine are. And we need to be very careful how we incorporate ourselves going forward, because we have an opportunity to take the best of us in terms of ourselves, the best of me, the best of you. How do we work that, which is already in huge abundance in the wine industry? How do we work that into a symbol of light for businesses in the rest of the world? That this is a business that is imbued with culture, it's imbued with creativity, it's imbued with passion. We're not necessarily driven by the big bucks, and yet we're an industry that thrives. And surely other industries can learn from that. And I think that's the key here. This is our opportunity.
And I guess actually, going back to the online thing, there's been this big explosion in online buying, and people spending a little bit more on wine and actually discovering different places to buy wine from, be it direct from wine merchants, be it from winemakers. So actually, that aspect to it may actually help take wine onto a slightly higher level in terms of the consumer understanding, and many of those emotional, passionate things you talk about, which is very much the trade understands, but for perhaps a larger proportion of the public, perhaps that's something to be optimistic about.
I think absolutely. I mean, I think I was alluding to it earlier. There's no doubt that if you're not in the online space or trying to get into the online space, you're going to miss a big trick. And I think there's always going to be, I hope there's always going to be a place for the traditional retailer where you can walk in and browse, in real time, looking at the bottles and feeling the weight of them, and the texture of the paper, all those wonderful things that we love to do, lose ourselves in front of a big shelf of wine, like a library, like a bookshop. I hope there'll always be an opportunity for those places to thrive. But I think without a doubt that as life starts speeding up again, and the harriedness of it, the confusion and chaos of just keeping your head above water starts to come to the fore, the idea that you can easily click on an easily navigable and a site which can access payment seamlessly, and you get a couple of cases of interesting things delivered to your door in a couple of days, or even a day, is if you're not in that space, I think you kind of miss a trick in terms of kind of surviving, and also part of your communication. I think this what the Zoom thing and this Teams thing and the Skype thing has allowed us to do are these tastings, and I think that they have their place, where you can send a mixed case of wine to a whole lot of people in Iceland, and your winemaker can be in the Yarra or Yarra Valley, in Australia, and do a tasting, and wow, it's real time. I think that is going to further enrich our world.
Right. Just finally, Bruce, I mean, I could talk to you all day long, but for the just in terms of closing things off, I mean, you've already in a way summed up how you see the bigger picture. But I mean, what would you say? Looking at it, what lessons we've kind of learned so far from what we've all been going through, and just any kind of final thoughts you might have.
I guess if there are. I think if there are lessons that I've learned, it's slightly cheesy to say that, to stop taking the people in your life for granted, and by that I don't necessarily mean your family, your immediate family. I mean your tribe. And I've felt amazing emotional warmth from people in this industry, which I think had always been bubbling under the surface, but has really come to the fore in this crisis. That's been a great lesson. It's been a humbling lesson, and it's been another reminder about why we're so lucky to be in this business. The other thing is that we have had to, in certain countries, I think South Africa being a prime example, with the kind of draconian and slightly nonsensical lockdown that we've had, we have had to start assessing how important civil society organizations are, and assessing the importance of people like nurses and frontline workers, and those people who've had to go back to work and are now being exposed to this virus, to allow food security to continue, to allow logistics of food security to remain as intact as possible. In South Africa, we've seen starvation around us in these poor rural areas, and we've had to sort of re-engage old, when I say old, I mean traditional social structures like churches and mosques, Hindu temples. We've had to look at things like volunteer firefighting services and volunteer police services to help manage queues at soup kitchens that we've been supplying food with through the Headstart Trust. We've had to, reassess things like Rotary and these traditional organizations that have almost fallen out of relevance or out of the limelight. Suddenly, these are the people who have the systems in place to raise money, to buy bread at the right price, to get it to the most needy, to make sure that a kid gets a piece of fruit a day. These have suddenly become so much more relevant and I think valued. And that for me is a lesson that we cannot ever make that mistake of being caught up in this greedy, selfish world that we were caught up in, and not value those pillars of society that have actually got us to where we've got to. We have to keep them, then we have to make them stronger, and those structures and the systems of civil society need to be strengthened so that we can protect ourselves from the kind of idiocy of politicians in many cases. And society needs to take a lead to look after our own in a lot of ways.
Thanks, Bruce. That's, I think that's, well, you know, South Africa, as we say, is a very unique country. And I think, you know, you know, wine is part of our society, but it's part of our business, but there's so much more bigger issues to be thinking about and worrying about. And actually, with your Headstart Trust, we'll put a link on the page on the website, and if people do want to donate to the soup kitchen that you're helping to run, we'll do that as well. But so can I just say thank you very much indeed, Bruce. I mean, wonderful insights, and you've taken us on a historical, cultural, passionate VINEX journey for the last 40 minutes. So I really appreciate your time, and you know, I really look forward to coming to your farm again and sharing your lovely wines with yourself in the near future, if we can.
Chief, I can't think of anyone else I would rather right now sit down and have a glass of wine with.
Yeah,
you're an absolute legend, mate, and I know that the whole industry celebrates you and loves you, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.